Hi everybody, here's our next reading of The Lost Track of Time by Paige Britt. Chapter 10. "That was a close call," said Penelope, after the wild boar was safely behind them. "Not at all," countered Dill. He was walking briskly down the trail, swinging his arms and taking deep breaths. "As soon as I realized the boar was ignoring you, I knew we'd be okay." "You did?" "Of course. You were a tremendous threat, but the boar didn't seem to notice." She was a tremendous threat? Penelope mulled this information over. It hardly seemed possible. She rarely had the upper hand in anything. "From what I can tell," continued Dill, "the wild boar didn't think you were the least bit interesting, which means he didn't think you were very dangerous. You and I both know that's bunk. Rubbish. Total nonsense. Young people are the most interesting people around. But wild boars wouldn't know that. And do you know why?" "No," said Penelope. "Because they were never children. Of course, at one time they looked like children and could easily be mistaken for children, but they were really little know-it-alls, which is a different thing altogether." Dill glanced over at her. "Certainly you've met a little know-it-all." Penelope thought about the girl with pigtails from science camp. "Oh yes," she said, "lots of them." "Well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about." By now they had reached the row of trees where they were headed, just as Dill had said. A creek wound its way through the tree roots. Dill found a shallow area scattered with rocks and leapt lightly from one to the next, chattering all the while. Almost all little know-it-alls become wild boars, although, now that I think about it, a few do manage to avoid that fate by learning to be inquisitive about something besides themselves. Dill reached the other side and turned back to look at Penelope. "Speaking of being inquisitive, how do you know all those fascinating words?" "Oh, well, I don't know them all," Penelope explained, balancing her foot on a rock, "but I guess you can say I collect them." She raced across the creek and landed on the other side with a hop. "I never expected them to come in handy." "Handy?" exclaimed Dill. "They were critical, vital, absolutely essential. I wouldn't have survived without them." Penelope beamed. She wasn't used to her words being important. "I suggest you expand your collection immediately," said Dill. Penelope's smile faded. She thought about her notebooks filled with drawings and sketches, dreams and ideas. Ideas that would turn into stories if only she could get them flowing again. "I'm not sure there's any use," she mumbled. Dill's eyes grew large. Huge, actually. For once he didn't say anything, he just stared at Penelope, waiting for her to continue. But she didn't want to continue. She didn't want to tell Dill the awful truth. It was no use collecting words because she would never use them. She would never be a writer, not if she couldn't moodle. Dill had said it himself. She was an anomaly, a failure. Penelope stole a glance up at Dill. He was waiting patiently for her to speak. "I want to be a writer," she said, her voice still soft, "and I used to believe that one day I would be, even though my parents don't think so. I was full of story ideas, so full I couldn't keep track of them all, but out of the blue they disappeared." Dill took a step back. "That's why I wanted to find the Great Moodler," Penelope rushed on. "I thought she could help me find out where all my ideas went. Help me become a moodler again. If I can't moodle, I can't write." "That," said Dill, pointing straight at her, "is a brilliant plan. You find the Great Moodler and get all your ideas back, and then the Great Moodler can find my lost way, and I'll be an explorer again." This time it was Penelope's turn to take a step back. She hadn't expected Dill to actually adopt the plan. "But I've run out of ideas and I can't moodle up any new ones. I'm not sure how to find her without—" "You can do it," said Dill, cutting her off. Look how you handled the wild boar." He turned and began to climb up the creek bank. "You're young and inquisitive, a moodler and a word collector," he called out, listing her qualifications. "What more do you need?" A lot, thought Penelope. Those traits hadn't led to much success in life so far. Besides, had Dill forgotten about her attempt to use the Moodle hat? She had come up with nothing. Penelope was just about to remind Dill of this fact when he let out a sharp cry. "It's gone!" Penelope scrambled up the creek bank to join him. Standing atop it, she looked out on a vast plain of rocks and boulders. "What's gone?" she asked. "The range of possibilities," wailed Dill, pointing off into the distance. "It used to be over there, along the horizon, and now it's gone." He began to pace back and forth, wringing his hands. "You see what I mean? I can't find anything anymore, not even a mountain range. This is bad, horrible, completely horrendous." Penelope stared at the plain. It was empty of any scenery except for rocks. Miles and miles of rocks. It looked like it would be hard to cross. "What are we going to do now?" she asked. "We'll just have to follow a hunch," said Dill. He stopped pacing and began to pat his pockets. "Do you have one? I seem to be all out." "Me?" asked Penelope. "Why would I have a hunch? I have no idea where we are, much less where we should go." "Hunches aren't ideas. They're inklings," explained Dill. "Don't inklings just pop into your head?" "Exactly, and they pop out just as quickly. That's why you've got to catch them when you can. Push everything out of your mind and see what pops out when you do. More than likely you'll see a hunch. That's when you snag it." "With your hands?" Dill looked at her as if she'd just said the moon was made of cheese. "Of course not. By listening to it. But be sure not to think while you do it," he instructed. "Thoughts scare them away. Now then, clear your mind and then look around a bit. You look up and I'll look down." Penelope couldn't imagine what she was looking for, but she did as she was told. She cleared her mind and then followed Dill's lead. He was walking in circles with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the ground. Penelope did the same, but looked up at the clouds. Walking around and around, staring at the sky, made Penelope woozy. Being woozy kept her from thinking too much, which turned out to be a good thing. After walking for a few moments, it dawned on her that she might feel less woozy if she stopped walking and focused on one specific spot. With her neck bent back, she locked her eyes on the spot above her nose. When her eyes focused, she saw the most unusual thing. There, on the tip of her nose, sat a small creature, so slight it seemed to be made of air. Penelope froze, her eyes fixed on the tiny thing. "Dill," she called in her quietest whisper. "Dill, come here." Dill rushed over. "Good job," he said, slapping Penelope on the back. Penelope stayed frozen in position. "Now what do I do?" she asked, hardly daring to move her mouth. "Just relax and concentrate on the question. What do we do now?" Penelope gently returned her head to an upright position. She crossed her eyes to check on the hunch. It was still there, resting on her nose. "Hurry up," said Dill. "We don't have to wear the poor thing out." Penelope looked around, searching for some sign or clue that would tell her what to do next. "Don't try to figure it out," said Dill. "Just listen to your hunch." "But I don't hear anything," said Penelope. "You've got to really listen," urged Dill. Penelope stopped looking around and relaxed. And when she did, she heard a small voice coming from what sounded like inside her own head. "Look up," it said. Penelope immediately checked to see if the creature was still on her nose. It had disappeared. "Oh, well," she thought, "here goes." She looked up. There, along the far horizon, was a black speck moving quickly toward her. It grew larger every second. Dill noticed it too and stood still, watching it come closer. The speck was beginning to take shape. It looked like a bird, a gigantic bird, a bird the size of a small airplane. "Run!" Dill shouted, and clutching his head, darted this way and that, forward and back, dodging left, then right. Penelope didn't move. Something told her, was it a hunch? She should stay right where she was. In seconds, the bird was upon them. Dill froze in fear and then dove for cover behind a particularly large rock. The bird circled around them a few times before touching down in a storm of dust. Once the air cleared, Penelope got a better look. It was a bright yellow bird with a long flourish for a tail. Black and gray bands striped its wings, and an elaborate looping plume swayed on its forehead. Its beak was brilliant green and would have been beautiful if it didn't look so sharp. "Cuckoo!" called the bird. Its voice was loud, but so lyrical that Penelope relaxed. Something so lovely wouldn't eat a person, she reassured herself. The bird made a deep bowing motion, one wing outstretched and the other bent in toward its chest. "Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" This time it called out with more persistence. "I think it's trying to tell us something," whispered Dill from behind the rock. "I think you're right," agreed Penelope. "I'll try to talk back." Mustering her courage, she addressed the gigantic bird. "Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" said Penelope in her best bird call. The bird cocked its head and half sang, half spoke. "How could you be cuckoo?" "Oh, but I'm not," stammered Penelope. I didn't expect. And your friend?" said the bird, jumping onto the rock Dill was hiding behind and peering down at him with interest. "Is he cuckoo, Tutu?" "Certainly not," said Dill, embarrassed at being caught hiding. He jumped to his feet and made a quick bow. "I'm Dill." The bird looked him over, up, down, left, right. When he was done, he turned back to Penelope. "I'm Penelope," she said, introducing herself with a curtsy. "I'm Cuckoo," said the bird, with a deep nod of his head. "We're looking for the range of possibilities," explained Dill. "Do you know where it is?" "I do," sang the bird. "But that's wonderful!" exclaimed Penelope. "Will you take us to it?" The cuckoo made a slight fluttering motion with his wings. "Cuckoo, if you really want me to." The giant bird crouched next to a large rock, and Penelope scrambled up and onto his back. "I hate flying," groaned Dill. "It always upsets my stomach." "It's the only way," said Penelope, coaxing him up. When they both were settled, the cuckoo leapt into the air. Dill made a sound like a frightened cat and clutched Penelope's waist. Penelope, however, laughed with delight as the bird took off. She was reminded of her fantasy to travel the world by hot air balloon, so she could see all the sights. This was much better. They flew for miles while the rocky wasteland ran beneath them. Here and there boulders rose up, dotting the scenery with their jagged forms. Once Penelope saw a herd of enormous honey-colored animals picking their way across the landscape. They looked like deer or antelope, but with much longer legs and strangely human faces. Their giant antlers were braided together like elaborate headdresses, and when they saw the cuckoo, they stopped and bowed their heads in solemn greeting. The bird called out, "Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" and dipped his wings in salute. What were those? Penelope had never seen such animals. "Mountain loopers." "It's a true honor to see them. They are so very few left." "Did you see them?" said Penelope, with a quick glance back at Dill, but his eyes were clamped shut. The image of the mountain loopers lingered in Penelope's mind, graceful and noble and somehow sad. Why were there only a few left? Where had they all gone? Just then a warm yellow cloud bank rolled across the sky to meet them. It quickly wrapped them in its soft color, and the mountain loopers disappeared from view. Penelope relaxed her grip on the cuckoo's feathered neck and let her fingers trail beside her. She longed to touch the brilliant streaks of yellow and gold that billowed around them. The faster they flew, the richer the yellow grew. Soon the clouds were the color of egg yolk, dotted with hints of pink and fuchsia. When they burst through, a small chain of colorful mountains appeared below them. The range spanned from the deepest, darkest blue to the shiniest, brightest white, and everything in between. The foot of each mountain was a single color: midnight blue, mossy green, burnt umber, and this color, whatever it was the darkest shade it could be. As the color moved up the mountain, the shade grew lighter and lighter until it reached its peak. The peaks were glorious pastels, shimmering with only the faintest pigment. There were about a dozen mountains surrounded like an island by the desert of rocks and rubble. "Look!" cried Penelope and nudged Dill with her elbow. "It's the range of possibilities!" Dill peeled open one eye and then, suddenly alert, the other. "But where are all the mountains?" he shouted against the wind. "What do you mean? They're right there." Penelope pointed at the peaks ahead. "But how can that be? There used to be hundreds. Where did they all go?" "Cuckoo," called the bird. "I'll show you." The little group of mountains huddled below them, but instead of landing, the cuckoo caught the wind and let it take them higher. Dill groaned in protest and closed his eyes again. Soon they were soaring over a brilliant blue peak on the northeastern edge of the range, heading straight for a dark cloud swirling above its summit. As they drew closer, Penelope's heart began to beat faster. This wasn't a cloud. It couldn't be. No cloud was this dark, this thick. It covered the sky like a blanket, casting the translucent pink beneath it into a dull gloom. At that moment she realized exactly where they were headed. They had come all this way to escape from the shadow, and now the cuckoo was taking them directly to it. Penelope clutched the bird tightly as she felt a cold force emanating from the shadow. She opened her mouth to warn Dill, and the cold slipped down her throat. "Dill!" Penelope gasped before her voice gave out. Dill leaned forward, daring a look over Penelope's shoulder, his face turning a slight shade of green. "Turn back!" he shouted at the bird, but the cuckoo only flew faster, heading straight toward the shadow until it enveloped them. A cold shock hit Penelope like icy water, and she felt a painful pressure seize her upper body. The deeper into the shadow the cuckoo flew, the greater the pressure became. It spread up her chest and into her throat, cutting off the air. Even though the great bird flapped his wings harder and faster, Penelope couldn't tell if he was moving or not. Everything inside the shadow was so still. Penelope gripped the cuckoo's neck as a horrible thought crossed her mind. Is he flying or falling? Just when Penelope felt the blackness creep across her eyes, they burst back into the day, or what passed for a day under the shadow. Penelope gasped for breath and let her eyes adjust to the dismal light. They had crossed over the peak. On the other side, the earth was barren, marked only by a strange black grid. There were no trees or greenery of any kind. Drifts of smoke climbed into the gray sky, filling the air with a horrible acrid smell. Penelope's eyes stung, and her throat felt as if it had been turned inside out. The cuckoo dropped lower. Penelope saw that the grid was a series of freshly tarred roads, crissing and crossing one another for miles. The farther the cuckoo flew, the more roads they saw. They were all kinds: highways, byways, toll roads, back roads, front roads, each very long and very straight. Giant trucks crawled like insects across them. Every scrap of earth not already paved was covered in digging, scooping, and drilling machines. Boom, boom, boom. Waves of sound shook the air. The cuckoo veered back toward the mountain range in the direction of the sound, flapping his wings with renewed vigor. A massive pillar of smoke hovered at the foot of the mountain they had just flown over. They drew nearer to the smoke until they were almost engulfed in it, and then, as if on cue, the booming began again. Boom! 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 The cuckoo faltered in mid-flight. Penelope's stomach dropped to her toes, while Dill grasped her waist painfully. The bird regained his balance and flew on. By now they could see the pillar wasn't smoke at all. It was dust. Boom! 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 The mountain shuddered. Boom! 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 With a horrible crash, a massive chunk of indigo-colored rock tumbled to the earth. As it fell, the color faded until it hit the ground and broke into a million gray pieces. With each blast of dynamite, more and more of the mountain shattered. Great gashes appeared in its side, and the peak wobbled dangerously until a final explosion sent it crashing down. The shimmering blue vanished in a pile of rubble. When the dust settled, Penelope watched in horror as a swarm of bulldozers scooped up the rocks and dumped them into a great toothy machine. Crunch, crunch, crunch! The machine ground the rocks to bits and spat them out into a line of waiting dump trucks. Once a truck was full, it drove down a 6-lane highway that stretched out of sight. "I've seen enough," cried Dill. The cuckoo flapped his gigantic wings, and up they went, into the shadow waiting above. That's the end of the chapter. See you next time.